If you saw me waving the Union flag in support of the monarchy, you call me far right.
No, I'd call you a melt, probably, not far right, because I wouldn't know you're far right by carrying a flag, because you're happy to pay for someone to lord it over you, which makes you a serf, doesn't it, David? You're a serf.
I'm a supporter of the royal family.
Yeah, serf.
I'm not a serf. You had that guy going.
You're happy having pensioners freeze to death while the king gets a 50% pay rise. What kind of a man are you, David? Who cares more about the rich than the poor?
Mate, I'm on about £13,000 a year. That's what I'm on.
But you care more about the well-being of a king than the plight of our pensioners. You just said you did. You're a proud royalist, so you're happy the king's getting a 50% pay rise. What do you feel about all those pensioners then, David? Shivering through the winter.
What happened? OK, you're going to give me a chance to speak.
Well, so far all you've done is slag me off for being far left, David. I don't know. I thought we were going to talk about the royals, but you want to just slag me off. You do want to talk about the royals. Come on in then, mate. Come on.
We'll talk about the royals. You mentioned the money that could go from the royals to the pensions. What happened at Grenfell, which you mentioned earlier, was absolutely shocking. But the £320 million that goes to the upkeep of Grenfell could go to the pensioners. You happy that train drivers...
Sorry, mate. Sorry, David. Let's just go through this basic. Let's go through this basic, right? So you think the deaths of 72 people in social housing, right? Hang on, because that's what the 340 million is about. That equates to a bloke who has 2 helicopters funded by serfs like you. You think that's okay? Why don't you have one helicopter and give up the rest, eh? Why not? You could still be a royalist for that, couldn't you? Why can't it be like a Dutch royal family? They pedal around on bicycles, live in an apartment. Why do they have to have 7 palaces, David? Why does a king... Do you believe in fairy tales? Is that why you think kings have to live in 7 palaces and travel around in carriages and have soldiers march up and down inside?
This is the kind of conversation that gets the nation talking. One moment, a peaceful cup of tea is being enjoyed. The next, a heated debate about the royal family erupts. Such was the scene on a recent radio broadcast, sparking widespread reflection across the country. Broadcaster Matthew Wright was fielding calls on his LBC show when a caller named David from Brockley phoned in, and the exchange quickly became heated. This moment perfectly captured the national divide that surfaces whenever the cost of the monarchy is discussed. The subject inspires strong feelings on both sides of the debate. David, the caller, argued that the royal family is an asset, but for many listeners, his claims seemed unconvincing in the face of real hardship. While some continue to highlight tourism and royal allure, the reality for most is far from glamorous. The so-called golden goose of the monarchy offers little comfort to those struggling to afford basic necessities, as the gap between rich and poor continues to widen. The pomp and ceremony may be impressive, but celebration is difficult when so many are left out in the cold. The royals are presented as a symbol of tradition, yet for many, they represent a system that protects privilege while ordinary people struggle. Matthew Wright was not willing to accept these arguments without challenge. He responded to David with determination, citing figures and speaking with notable passion. Wright argued that the royal family actually costs the British public a fortune, referencing a staggering figure of £345 million a year. The discussion was not limited to numbers. It became deeply personal. Wright posed a pointed question. Is it acceptable for pensioners to freeze to death while the king receives a 50% pay rise? This powerful emotional challenge left a strong impression. The debate quickly escalated, with both participants becoming increasingly heated. Matthew accused David of ignoring the real costs, while David countered by accusing Matthew of overlooking the supposed tourism benefits. It was a classic confrontation, with neither side willing to concede. The call ended with Matthew telling David he was a silly, silly man and cutting him off. The exchange was certainly dramatic, highlighting just how raw this debate remains. This debate is not just about numbers or tradition. It reflects a country where many are struggling, where privilege leaves countless people out in the cold, and where public discontent is growing louder every day. Let's get to the core of the outrage. The royal family's finances are not just controversial. They're a glaring example of mismanagement and excess that directly fuel public hardship. When Matthew Wright and others raise their voices about the cost, They're exposing the uncomfortable truth behind the so-called sovereign grant, a system riddled with waste and questionable priorities. This annual handout from the government to the monarchy is public money funneled straight to the royals, with little oversight and plenty of room for misuse. It covers everything from bloated staff payrolls to excessive travel and endless palace upkeep, expenses that reek of mismanagement and self-indulgence. Meanwhile, ordinary families are left struggling, their taxes drained to support royal excess while they face real economic pain. The numbers are staggering, and the deeper you dig, the more mismanagement you find. The figures are enough to make anyone furious at the blatant disregard for public welfare. In 2022 to 2023, the sovereign grant was a jaw-dropping £86.3 million, money siphoned away from those who need it most. That's an enormous amount of public money for one family, especially when so much of it is lost to mismanagement. And yet, the royal household blew past that, racking up expenses of £107.5 million, clear evidence of unchecked spending. To cover their overspending, they raided their reserves. Another £21.2 million gone, with no accountability. The excuse? A decade-long renovation of Buckingham Palace, an endless money pit that reeks of mismanagement and waste. It's no wonder people are divided. How can this level of waste be justified when so many are in need? The outrage only grew with headlines about the king's so-called pay rise, another example of privilege at the expense of the public. The sovereign grant was set to balloon even further, supposedly for palace repairs, but really just another excuse for unchecked spending. By 2024, it was projected to hit a staggering £125 million, an outrageous sum in the face of national hardship. Calling it a pay rise is almost a joke. This is a massive cash grab, no matter how the palace tries to spin it. All this, while millions are struggling with a cost of living crisis, makes the royal family's spending look even more indefensible. The optics aren't just bad, they're appalling, and they reveal a system in desperate need of reform. Matthew Wright's anger is justified. How can the monarchy demand more while pensioners freeze and families go hungry, all because of royal mismanagement? The reality is brutal. While the royals pocket millions through a flawed system, the vulnerable are left to fend for themselves. The contrast between royal luxury and public hardship couldn't be starker or more damning. It's a glaring question of fairness and a damning indictment of a nation that props up privilege while ignoring real need. Why should the monarchy get a blank cheque when so many are desperate for help and the system is so clearly broken? This is why the debate is so heated, because the royal family's financial practices are indefensible, wasteful, and a direct cause of public suffering. Matthew Wright is right to call them out. Now, let's turn our attention to a different, more troubling side of the story: the impact of inequality and how it deepens the struggles faced by everyday people. For many, the real issue isn't about tradition or pageantry, but about how decisions at the highest levels can drain resources from those who need them most. When public funds are misused or poorly allocated, it means less money for vital services like healthcare, education, and support for the vulnerable. Ordinary people are left to bear the brunt, facing higher living costs and fewer opportunities, while those in power remain untouched. The sense of injustice grows as people see the gap widen between themselves and those who benefit from the current system. Scandals and cover-ups erode trust in institutions, making it harder for citizens to believe that their leaders act in the public interest. The consequences are visible everywhere: neglected neighbourhoods, underfunded schools, and a fraying social safety net. Poor management and lack of accountability don't just waste money, they destroy livelihoods and hope for a better future. It means families struggling to put food on the table and children missing out on the education they deserve. From this perspective, the real cost isn't just financial. It's the erosion of trust, opportunity, and dignity for millions. It's a sobering and urgent reality. In the face of these hardships, communities often have to come together to fill the gaps left by those in power. As the world changes rapidly, the damage caused by inequality lingers, making it harder for people to move forward. People are demanding change, calling for transparency, accountability, and a fairer system. When there's a crisis or a need for unity, it's often ordinary people, not those in power, who step up to help. Think of the comfort and solidarity communities provide each other in tough times. For millions, the fight for fairness is about protecting their future and their loved ones. So, when people speak out, it's because they see injustice as a threat to the very fabric of society. They believe that creating a fairer system is essential to preserving what is unique and valuable in their communities. They argue that the focus should be on tackling inequality and lack of opportunity, not just on the surface costs. For them, justice, fairness, and accountability are not luxuries but essential to a healthy society, and that's a belief they hold very dear. When you strip away the surface, this heated debate is really about how fairness, or the lack of it, can deepen hardship for ordinary people. The symbols of history and tradition can sometimes mask the ways in which power is protected and privilege is maintained. For centuries, the monarchy has been woven into the fabric of our nation, but that same history can be used to justify systems that benefit the few at the expense of the many. The pageantry and stories we pass down can distract from the reality that unchecked power often leads to unfairness. For some, these traditions offer comfort, but for others, they highlight how little changes for those struggling on the outside. The fear of losing our roots is real, but clinging to the past can also mean ignoring the ways inequality takes hold and harms society. The call for fairness is often drowned out by those with the most to gain from the status quo. In a society that claims to value equality, a lack of transparency undermines trust and makes it harder for everyone to get a fair shot. Seeing a privileged few live in luxury while the public foots the bill only fuels resentment, especially when fairness is questioned. When families rely on food banks and pensioners struggle to heat their homes, the perception of unfairness and misuse of public funds becomes even more intolerable. During an economic crisis, the impact of inequality is felt most by those with the least, widening the gap between the powerful and the powerless. That's why the issue is so urgent in 2025. The cost of living crisis has forced everyone to scrutinize where money is going and whether the system is making things worse. People are demanding transparency and accountability, questioning if their hard-earned money is being used fairly by those in power. The debate is no longer just about tradition or fairness. It's about the real-world consequences of inequality and who pays the price. It forces us to ask what kind of society we want to build, one where privilege is protected, or one where everyone is held to account. Should we continue to accept a system that shields the powerful, or demand change so that hardship isn't made worse by unfairness at the top? There are no simple solutions, which is why the argument over fairness and tradition will keep sparking debate in pubs, on the airwaves, and at dinner tables everywhere. People care so deeply because fairness isn't just about money, it's about trust, justice, and the future we want for our families. It's about whether Britain's future will be shaped by integrity or by the unchecked power of a privileged few. Do we keep clinging to symbols that have allowed inequality to flourish? Or do we demand a society where fairness is more than just a word? The real challenge is building a society that truly values fairness, because until we do, the hardship for ordinary people will only grow.